If you grew up feeling like you were the problem child, I want to start by saying this. You're not imagining it, and you're definitely not alone. A lot of adults with ADHD don't just carry attention issues. We carry a nervous system that's learned early on that mistakes are dangerous or that my needs always cause conflict. When that's your baseline, ADHD symptoms don't exist in a vacuum. They end up getting amplified by stress, shame, and survival strategies. This video isn't about blaming parents. Many parents were overwhelmed, unsupported, or carrying their own traumas. But it is about naming patterns and understanding the science behind why certain family dynamics can leave an ADHD kid with deeper scars, and why those scars often look like worsening ADHD in adulthood. In family systems, especially in stressed family systems, people often specialize into roles. The role isn't your personality, it's simply a coping strategy that the family system rewards over time. When a family stress is high and emotional maturity is limited, the system unconsciously tries to stabilize itself. One common way is by assigning roles that distribute tension. A few classic roles are as follows: the scapegoat, the identified problem. This child becomes the container for blame. When anything goes wrong, conflict, stress, embarrassment, financial pressure, it gets redirected into what's wrong with this child. The scapegoat's behavior becomes the family's main storyline. Then you have the golden child, the child who's idealized and held up as proof the family is fine. This child may receive praise and protection, but often learns that love is conditional on performance, obedience, and image. Next, you have the invisible child, the child who disappears to stay safe. They minimize needs, avoid conflict, and learn that attention can be dangerous. They often grow up with a don't take up space rule. Then we have the helper or the caretaker child, the emotional needs manager. This child senses moods, fixes problems, mediates arguments, and becomes mature early on in their childhood. They may be praised for being easy, but their own needs get postponed indefinitely. In healthier families, roles are flexible. People can move between them. In unhealthy or chronically stressed families, roles end up getting rigid. The same child gets stuck being the problem, and the system unconsciously depends on that role to avoid deeper issues. ADHD kids are disproportionately at risk of being placed into the scapegoat role for a few reasons, and none of them are because the ADHD kid is bad. First, ADHD affects executive functioning, the brain's management system. That means ADHD often shows up as trouble inhibiting impulses, working memory challenges, time blindness, emotional dysregulation, or difficulty with task initiation. Now imagine a family that already feels stressed, ashamed, or out of control. The ADHD behavior becomes terribly visible. It interrupts the family's preferred narrative that everything is fine. It forces attention onto the child's unmet needs, structure, emotional coaching, predictability, flexibility. In a regulated home, an ADHD child's struggles get translated as, you need support. In a dysregulated home, those same struggles get translated as, you're misbehaving on purpose. That misinterpretation is huge. If a parent believes a behavior is intentional defiance rather than developmental difficulty, the response becomes punishment, criticism, yelling, and shame. Over time, the child becomes the one who causes problems. Another factor, ADHD kids often trigger adult nervous systems. If a parent grew up in a strict environment, a child who has impulsivity issues or emotionally intense outbursts, it can activate a parent's own unresolved fears, embarrassment, or shame. Instead of calming themselves, they try to control the child, and control often escalates the situation even further. I remember myself as a child being yelled at and constantly told I was being difficult on purpose, like I was intentionally complicating my own life. But internally, I was trying to be a wasn't trying to be a problem. I was drowning in overwhelm and getting punished for it constantly. But finally, once family labels someone as the problem, confirmation bias often kicks in. Every mistake becomes proof and successes get minimized. The system stops seeing the child clearly. They always see them as the problem and only the problem. In these families, the harm is often not one dramatic event. It's patterned, it's daily, it's relational, and it frequently falls into two categories: emotional abuse and emotional neglect. Emotional abuse is not only screaming or name calling, though it can include that, it can also include chronic humiliation, blaming, and invalidation. Examples include: you're too sensitive, you're overreacting, why can't you just be normal? You're always angry, you always ruin everything. Parents will mock the child's emotions or mistakes. They'll compare siblings to create shame. Why can't you be like your brother? Turning the child into the family's joke or a cautionary tale. Emotional neglect, on the other hand, is quieter but just as damaging. Things like not noticing distress until it becomes a crisis, not teaching emotional regulation skills, ignoring the child's internal experiences. Stop crying. Being physically present but emotionally unavailable, and treating needs as inconveniences. From attachment perspective, these patterns matter because kids regulate through relationships. Josh Bowlby's attachment theory, outlined in his book Attachment and Loss, emphasizes that a child's sense of safety comes from consistent, attuned caregiving. When a child's emotions are repeatedly met with rejection, punishment, or ridicule, the child learns, my feelings are unsafe, to express or to speak out about. That's not a thought. It becomes a nervous system rule. Why do parents do this? Usually it's a combination of stress, limited emotional skills, and their own history. Some parents are overwhelmed. Some are emotionally immature. Some are narcissistic. Some are carrying untreated trauma. Some are perfectionists and interpret a child's struggles as a reflection of their worth. None of that makes it okay, but it helps explain how these patterns form and repeat. A balancing line you can use is explaining why is not excusing the impact. Scapegoated ADHD children often live with chronic toxic shame. Toxic shame isn't just feeling bad about something you did, but a persistent feeling of being flawed, broken, or unworthy. Toxic shame attacks one's core identity and not just their behavior. Over time, many kids learn to anticipate rejection. They may become hypervigilant, quick to panic, or numb and shut down. The psychological impact is where you see the development of core beliefs. Cognitive therapist Dr. Aaron Beck describes in his book Cognitive Therapy and Emotional Disorders how persistent experiences shape schemas. Deep assumptions like, I'm defective, I'm a burden, if I make a mistake, I'll be rejected. If the child repeatedly experiences criticism without repair, they struggle to develop stable self trust. Instead of I can learn, they learn I'm failing or I'm a failure. Okay, here's where the science gets real. Chronic stress activates the HPA axis, which increases cortisol. Neuroscientist Bruce McEwen's work on allostatic load explains how repeated stress activation wears down the brain and body over time. When cortisol stays elevated, it affects the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, and the amygdala. In plain language, the brain becomes better at detecting threat and worse at organizing life. Now add ADHD, which already involves differences in dopamine-based reward processing. ADHD isn't no dopamine, but it often involves inefficient dopamine signaling and motivation regulation, meaning it's harder to sustain effort when the reward isn't immediate. Stress further reduces flexible thinking and increases reactive behavior, so the child's ADHD symptoms can look worse, not because the child is choosing it, but because their brain is developing under threat. Their system becomes optimized for survival, not schoolwork, chores, or calm conversations. I can remember the feeling of walking into a room and instantly scanning to see what the vibe was at that time. Not because I was being dramatic, but because I needed to know if I was about to get yelled at or blamed for something I probably didn't even do. When these childhood patterns follow you into adulthood, they often show up as a mix of ADHD traits and trauma adaptations. People frequently think that they're just bad at life, but the pattern is usually coherent once you know what to look for. Here are some common adult outcomes: rejection sensitivity and feedback panic. Many adults feel intense emotional pain around criticism. ADHD already includes rejection sensitivity dysphoria for many people, but scapegoating teaches the nervous system that feedback equals danger. Even neutral corrections can trigger shame, anger, or shutdown. Perfectionism plus avoidance. A common loop is, if I can't do it perfectly, why bother starting? This is not laziness, it's a threat response. Starting a task activates memories of being judged, failing, or being blamed. Avoidance becomes self-protection. People pleasing and over responsibility. Scapegoated kids often become adults who take responsibility for everyone's emotions. If the conflict used to be your fault, you just learn to manage everyone else's to stay safe. That becomes chronic caretaking and burnout. Shame-based motivation and burnout cycles. Many adults only feel motivated when panic hits, deadlines, consequences, or fear. That's because your nervous system learned to move under threat. It works short term, but destroys you long term. This may affect relationship patterns as well. Adults may fear being seen, fear being truly known, or expect abandonment after small mistakes. They may over explain, over apologize, or avoid conflict entirely. Not everyone experiences all of these, and you can have these patterns without labeling yourself as traumatized. But if your childhood included chronic blame and lack of repair, these adult patterns make sense. To bring this together, it helps to name what's happening. ADHD plus adverse childhood experiences is not just more ADHD. It's ADHD layered with survival wiring. Dr. Gabor Mate, in his book Scattered Minds, talks about ADHD through a lens of development, stress, and sensitivity. A children's nervous system develops in relationship, and chronic stress shapes attention and self-regulation. The balanced view is this: ADHD is neurodevelopmental. It has strong biological and genetic components. The environment shapes how severely symptoms show up, how a person copes, and what comorbid issues develop, like anxiety, depression, or trauma responses. In practice, a child with ADHD who receives structure, coaching, and warmth tends to do better than a child with ADHD who receives blame, shame, and unpredictability. So if you're an adult whose symptoms feel intense, it may not be because you're failing. It may be because your nervous system has been working overtime for decades. If you try to outdiscipline a threatened nervous system, you'll keep losing. The first goal is safety cues. Polyvagal theory explains how our bodies shift between states of safety and threat. When you feel safe, your prefrontal cortex comes back online. You plan better, you regulate better. Practical safety cues can be things like predictable routines, gentle lighting, sound controls if you're sensory sensitive, clear boundaries with conflict-heavy people, slowing down before transitions, and co-regulation, which is having safe people in safe spaces. One thing that is extremely helpful for us adults with ADHD is the concept of external systems. Instead of relying entirely on memory, motivation, or willpower, we move the important tasks outside of the brain and into the environment. For example, automation can remove entire categories of stress. Automatic bill pay, recurring reminders, and scheduled payments eliminate the need to remember deadlines. Instead of relying on working memory, the system handles it for you. Visual task systems and checklists are another powerful tool. When tasks are written down and visible, they stay present in your awareness. Many people with ADHD find if something is invisible, it effectively disappears. Simplified routines reduce cognitive load. When daily routines follow predictable patterns, the brain doesn't have to constantly decide what comes next. A helpful way to think about these tools is that they're prosthetics for executive function. Just like glasses help someone see more clearly, external systems help the ADHD brain organize and execute tasks more effectively. Self-compassion is not, I never have to change. It's, I can change better when I'm not being attacked. Shame says I'm bad. Compassion says, it's okay, this is hard, and I can learn. Trauma-informed therapy, including somatic approaches, can help unwind threat responses. ADHD coaching can help build practical systems. This combo is powerful. It calms the nervous system and builds support. One of the most hopeful things neuroscience has taught us is that the brain is not fixed. Through a process called neuroplasticity, the brain can change and adapt based on repeated experiences. For adults with ADHD, especially those who grew up as the scapegoat, this is incredibly important. Patterns of shame, fear, or hypervigilance may have been learned early in childhood, but they are not permanent. Small, consistent wins begin to rewire the brain over time. Supportive relationships, predictable routines, and environments that feel safe help calm the nervous system. When the brain experiences safety and success repeatedly, it gradually shifts from survival mode towards learning, growth, and stability. If you were scapegoated, labeled difficult, or treated like the problem, like I was, I want to leave you with this. A child's job is not to stabilize an adult's emotions. A child's job is to be guided. If you didn't get that guidance, your nervous system adapted. That adaptation may look like ADHD symptoms, anxiety, perfectionism, avoidance, or shutdown, but it's not proof you're defective. It's proof you survived. And with the right knowledge, systems, and support, you can start living like you're safe now, and not like you're still waiting to be blamed.